Prince Andrew's former maid opens up about his true behavior. He was once called Prince Charming, the royal with a dazzling smile and perfect manners. But now, the mask has fallen. One of his former maids has shattered the illusion, exposing him not as a noble gentleman, but as a spoiled, venomous shadow of royalty. The world no longer sees Prince Andrew as a prince, but as a man consumed by arrogance and cruelty. Watch this video till the end, because what his ex-maid Charlotte Briggs revealed will make you see him in a way you never imagined, and suddenly, everything about his past scandals starts to make sense. You see, Andrew didn't become terrible over time. He always was. Charlotte Briggs once believed that serving the royal family was a dream come true, that love, respect, and loyalty could bring out the best in anyone. But she learned the hard way that when you nurture a snake, no matter how gently, it still bites. At just 21, Charlotte stepped into the glittering halls of Buckingham Palace, expecting grandeur and grace. What she found instead was a nightmare. Behind the gold-trimmed doors, she served a man her fellow staff whispered about, not as the charming Duke of York the world admired, but as an arrogant, rude, and unhinged tyrant. In a raw, unapologetic interview with the Daily Mail, she didn't hold back. She said, "I don't give a toss what Prince Andrew feels. He's a horrible, nasty man." Those weren't the words of someone seeking attention. They were the outcry of a woman who had endured humiliation behind palace walls. Her words peeled back the royal facade, revealing a man who was lazy, entitled, and quick to anger. A man very different from the fairy tale prince the public once adored. Behind the polished image of a royal gentleman lies a far darker truth. According to one of his former maids, Prince Andrew's charm was nothing but a mask, one that slipped the moment the palace doors closed. Charlotte Briggs, who once served him, recalled that even the simplest household tasks became battlegrounds for his temper. Curtains, of all things, were one of his obsessions. Though they hung just inches from his hand, he refused to touch them. That was her job. And heaven forbid she left the slightest sliver of daylight between them. The day she did, all hell broke loose. Andrew stormed out of his office, his footsteps echoing through the corridor as his voice exploded in fury. "Can't you bloody do anything right?" he screamed, hurling insults that left the young maid in tears. It was just one example of the toxic hierarchy inside his household, a world where mistakes weren't tolerated no matter how trivial. "I did everything I could to avoid him," Briggs admitted. His presence was unpredictable, his temper explosive. But what truly disturbed her were his bizarre demands, rituals so obsessive they bordered on the absurd. His most infamous quirk? A collection of 72 teddy bears, plus a stuffed hippo and black panther, all arranged with military precision. What seemed like a childish eccentricity to outsiders was a nightmare for staff. No one touched them without written instructions, laminated sheets detailing exactly where each toy belonged, which bears stood at attention by his bedside, and how his two favorites had to guard him as he slept. Briggs recalled spending an entire day learning the art of teddy bear arrangement, an initiation into the strange and humiliating world of serving Prince Andrew. Behind palace walls, where grace and grandeur meet gold-plated arrogance, one prince stood out, not for his charm, but for his tantrums. A single mistake could set him off. Curtains drawn a fraction too wide, pillows not perfectly aligned, or a teddy bear misplaced, and chaos would erupt. Prince Andrew's bedroom, according to his former maid Charlotte Briggs, looked less like a royal suite and more like a shrine to his own fragility. Every item had to obey his obsession with order, the royal crest pillows precisely centered, pajamas folded in perfect symmetry, stuffed animals displayed by day, hidden by night, and restored again by dawn. To outsiders, these might sound like odd royal quirks, but to those who served him, it was a daily nightmare. It was like walking on eggshells every day, Briggs described how the prince's slightest dissatisfaction could spiral into rage. The image of a man who cried over curtains and demanded servants handle his teddy bears didn't match the charming public figure he tried to be, and his behavior towards staff, Briggs revealed, was far from princely. Unlike Charles, Edward, or even Prince Philip, each remembered for their basic courtesy. Andrew treated those around him like trash, barking orders without a hint of gratitude. Other staff backed her up. One recalled sprinting across the room to close curtains Andrew stood right beside, simply to remind her of her place. Another spoke of his cold, cutting tone, even in trivial conversations. What made it worse was how needless it all seemed. Andrew had no throne to inherit, no heavy crown to bear, only ceremonies and privileges. Yet he demanded worship as if he were king. In the end, Briggs's story wasn't just about childish tantrums or spoiled habits. It was about a pattern. A man shielded by title, unchecked by consequence, and trapped in a world where the only thing bigger than his ego was his need to be obeyed. He wasn't just arrogant, he was cruel. A boy who found joy not in laughter, but in control. Who saw kindness as weakness and obedience as his birthright. To serve him was not to assist, it was to surrender. Working under him felt less like palace duty and more like surviving a storm of entitlement. And yet, this wasn't even the beginning. Because long before Prince Andrew became the man feared by his staff, there was already something unsettling about him, something even Charlotte noticed. It began when he was just a child. While Charles buried himself in books and Anne earned respect with her grit, Andrew was different. Not charmingly mischievous, not endearingly spoiled, but disturbingly cruel. From the very start, he seemed to enjoy the suffering of others. As a toddler, he mocked the Queen's guards, pulling faces and barking insults to make them break composure. When they stood firm, he grew furious, screaming, throwing things, doing anything to force a reaction. Rules, even royal ones, were beneath him. But his worst impulses didn't stop with people. Animals, too, became victims of his temper. He'd kick the family dogs, laugh at their cries, and strike horses with sticks just to see them flinch. The royal grooms, disgusted and furious, finally snapped. One day, they grabbed the young prince, shoved him head first into a pile of horse shit, and buried him in it. A brutal lesson for men who'd had enough of his cruelty. For a moment, the boy who believed himself untouchable was forced to face what he truly was. But if anyone thought that humiliation would change him, they were wrong. It only made him worse. It was a punishment so brutal that it shocked even the palace staff. But they believed he had earned every bit of it. And that wasn't the only time royal protocol was broken just to put Andrew in his place. On another occasion, his endless taunting of a palace footman pushed the man past his limit. The servant struck him, hard enough to leave a dark bruise beneath his royal eye. When the footman, trembling with regret, offered his resignation, the Queen did something unexpected. She refused to accept it. Even she seemed to understand Andrew's cruelty had gone too far. The blow, though forbidden, had been deserved. But Andrew's nastiness didn't stop with the staff. It seeped into every relationship he had, even with his younger brother, Edward. Every interaction was a contest, every moment an opportunity for domination. He shoved him, snatched his cakes, left him bruised, not out of sibling rivalry, but from a twisted need to prove superiority. Those who saw it didn't see playfulness, they saw a tyrant in training. At school, his reputation arrived long before he did. At prep,
And later, at Gordonstown, classmates called him Baby Grumbling for his tantrums and the Snigger for the way he laughed when others suffered. The royal charm people expected never showed up. Instead, there was only arrogance, smug, spoiled, and cruel. And as he grew older, that cruelty didn't fade. It sharpened. Rumors spread of him yanking at the zippers of female staff, shoving their faces into plates, sneering, "Smell the pâté." On camping trips, he'd tear down other shelters, toss their gear into rivers, and laugh as they shivered through the night. To Andrew, it was harmless fun. To everyone else, it was humiliation. Staff would later describe his words, his tone, his presence, not as princely, but tyrannical. He didn't ask for things. He threw them to the floor and barked, "Pick that up." For men and women trained to serve with dignity, it wasn't just shocking, it was degrading. And yet, in the grand halls of privilege, no one dared to truly stop him. They didn't see a cheeky young prince. They saw a tyrant in training. From the very start, palace staff whispered about him with dread, not affection. By the time he first slipped into a royal uniform, his reputation had already curdled. He wasn't the charming heir like Charles, nor the tough but competent Anne. He was the one everyone hated dealing with. The boy they quietly called intolerable. His sense of fun? Cruelty. His idea of respect? Total submission. The older he grew, the worse it got. Staff hoped he'd grow out of it, but instead, he grew into it. And by the late 1990s, the mask of royal decorum had begun to slip for good. The whispers weren't just about tantrums anymore. They were about money, women, and an ego too swollen to hide. While Charles was busy polishing his image after Diana's death, Andrew was sinking deeper into scandal. The first cracks appeared in his finances. His taste for luxury, fed by royal privilege, collided with reckless business schemes. Then came the rumors, cash for access deals, secret meetings, and friendships with men the palace wished the world would forget. Officials worked overtime to bury the stories, but the whispers only grew louder. What began as quiet favors turned into something darker, a prince accused of selling his royal name to the highest bidder. They tried to bury it, but the truth wouldn't stay hidden. No matter how hard the palace denied it, the paper trail told another story, a story of money, scandal, and a prince consumed by obsession. After his messy split from Sarah Ferguson, Prince Andrew's life spun into something darker. He wasn't the dashing royal anymore. He was the middle-aged man chasing women young enough to be his daughter. His driver once confessed that nearly 10 women could be seen entering and leaving his Bangkok residence in a single day. It was beyond shameful. It was alarming. The tabloids branded him Randy Andrew, and the nickname stuck like a stain the royal family could never wash off. Even inside palace walls, whispers spread like wildfire. Rumors of his reckless behavior, his arrogance, and his disturbing taste in company. Then came Jeffrey Epstein. Long before Epstein's crimes became headline news, Andrew was already a familiar face in his mansions, his Caribbean retreat, and even aboard his infamous private jet. When photos surfaced of the two walking together after Epstein's first prison sentence, the world gasped. And yet, instead of distance, Andrew offered loyalty, defending Epstein, calling him a true friend, and insisting he had no regrets. That arrogance would become his undoing. But Epstein wasn't the only dark cloud over Andrew's head. Behind palace doors, the staff had their own horror stories. Maids spoke of humiliation, being ordered to sprint up 7 flights of stairs just to close curtains right beside him. Others described his rage over something as trivial as a teddy bear being moved. The Queen's staff whispered his new nickname, the Prince of Darkness. Andrew didn't command respect. He demanded submission. Gardeners trembled under his temper, maids wept in silence, and even senior staff avoided eye contact. To them, he wasn't a royal. He was a tyrant, one who wore a crown of entitlement and wielded cruelty as his scepter. He wasn't just difficult, he was explosive. Drivers were called how a 5-minute delay could send him into a screaming fit. One former equerry said, working for Prince Andrew was like being a human punching bag. For years, these stories stayed buried, whispered among palace staff, ignored by the press. But one by one, they began to surface, and each revelation was darker than the last. The world got its first real glimpse of his arrogance during his time as Britain's trade envoy, a role meant to project dignity and diplomacy. Instead, Andrew turned it into a traveling circus of entitlement. Reports described him berating hotel staff abroad, treating waiters with open contempt, and demanding suites fit for dictators rather than diplomats. In the Middle East, one hotel employee was left in tears after he screamed over the room's temperature. Diplomats later confessed that part of their job became cleaning up the chaos he left behind. His personal life didn't help his reputation. Even after divorcing Sarah Ferguson, the two remained entangled, living together, feeding off each other's scandals, and milking the perks of royal life. When Ferguson was caught accepting cash for introductions to Andrew, it was clear neither cared much for dignity, only access and status. Critics said they used their royal titles as armor, shielding themselves from accountability. But by the early 2000s, the armor was cracking. Andrew wasn't respected like Charles, admired like Anne, or even tolerated like Edward. He was mocked. His new nickname, Air Miles Andy, came after revelations that he squandered taxpayer money on private jets and helicopters for trivial trips. The image was devastating. A man so addicted to luxury he couldn't see how grotesque it looked in a Britain tightening its belt. And with each passing year, more palace insiders spoke out. What they described wasn't just vanity, it was obsession. A prince consumed by status, desperate for attention, and utterly blind to the wreckage of his own making. It started as whispers, then it became a roar that even Buckingham Palace couldn't silence. At family gatherings, his arrogance made him an outsider. Princess Diana once reportedly said that Andrew was the least intelligent of the Queen's sons, but the most entitled. And for once, no one argued. The warning signs had been there all along: entitlement, temper, toxic friendships, reckless spending. Yet no one dared stop him. Protected by his mother's blind affection, Andrew drifted further into the shadows, shielded from consequences, immune to shame, until Epstein's empire crumbled and dragged him into the wreckage. Suddenly, the world didn't see a royal prince. They saw something far darker. The year was 2010. The moment everything began to unravel. Jeffrey Epstein had just been released from prison for soliciting from a minor. Most powerful men fled from him. Andrew did the opposite. Cameras captured him strolling through Central Park beside Epstein, laughing as if scandal itself were beneath him. That image detonated like a bomb. For the first time, the Queen's son was seen walking side by side with a convicted sex offender. And then came Virginia. In 2015, her name erupted across headlines. Virginia Giuffre accused Epstein of trafficking her as a teenager, and she claimed that Andrew was one of the men she was forced to be with. She described meeting him 3 times, each encounter allegedly arranged by Epstein's close associate, Ghislaine Maxwell. And then came the photograph, the one that haunted Andrew ever since. His arm around a 17-year-old Virginia, Ghislaine smiling just behind them. Andrew denied everything. He insisted he'd never met her, even going so far as to say the photograph was fake. But forensic experts found no trace of tampering. His denial only made him look more desperate. The palace panicked. For years, they scrambled to protect him, issuing vague statements, leveraging the Queen's authority, and hoping silence would smother the flames. But the evidence wouldn't die. Flight logs showed Andrew traveling with Epstein. Witnesses saw them together in London, New York, and the Caribbean. And with every revelation, the illusion of royal immunity began to crack. It was supposed to be his redemption. Instead, it became his execution. broadcast live. By 2019, the walls were closing in on Prince Andrew. The Epstein scandal had scorched everything it touched, and the pressure was unbearable. So Andrew did what few royals ever dared. He agreed to a televised BBC interview, convinced he could talk his way out of disaster. But what followed wasn't just a PR misstep, it was the slow-motion collapse of a prince's reputation. From the moment he opened his mouth, it went downhill. He insisted that on the night Virginia Giuffre said he met him at a London nightclub, he couldn't have been there because he was at a Pizza Express in Woking with his daughter. He clung to that detail as if it were sacred proof, completely unaware how absurd it sounded. Within hours, the internet turned it into a meme factory. The Pizza Express Prince was born. Then came the sweating claim. Giuffre said Andrew had been sweating profusely as they danced. His response? That he couldn't sweat at the time because of a medical condition from the Falklands War. The excuse was so bizarre, so surreal, that it didn't just stretch belief, it obliterated it. What the world saw wasn't a wrongly accused man, it was a royal utterly detached from reality. But the real nail in the coffin wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. There was no empathy, no remorse, no acknowledgement of Epstein's victims. When asked why he stayed at Epstein's house after the billionaire's conviction, Andrew called it convenient. A mistake, yes, but a useful one, he claimed, because it gave him the chance to end their friendship in person. To millions watching, it sounded more like justification than regret. The backlash was instant and ferocious. Headlines called it a train wreck, a car crash, the worst royal interview in modern history. Even the Queen couldn't shield him this time. Within days, Andrew was forced to step back from royal duties, a polite term for exile. For the first time in living memory, a senior royal had been publicly, irrevocably disgraced. And the damage? It didn't stop with that interview. It was only beginning.
The fall was absolute. Once the Queen's favorite son, now the royal family's greatest liability. Charities cut him off. Universities erased his name. Military units that once saluted him now wanted nothing to do with him. Prince Andrew had become radioactive, a man whose very presence tainted the monarchy. But Virginia Giuffre wasn't done. In 2021, she took her fight to a U.S. court, accusing Andrew of sexual assault. His legal team threw everything at the wall: technical loopholes, denials, claims of immunity. Nothing stuck. A judge ruled the case would go to trial. That left Andrew with two choices: face Giuffre in open court or pay to make it disappear. He chose the latter. In early 2022, he quietly settled for a reported £12 million. Officially, it wasn't an admission of guilt, but the public wasn't fooled. To many, it looked like hush money, and whispers grew louder that the Queen herself had footed the bill to shield the institution, not the man. By then, the visual humiliation was complete. At Prince Philip's funeral, Andrew walked alone. At the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, he was banned from the balcony. And when his mother was laid to rest, he stood stripped of his uniform, the only son not wearing one. Then came Charles. The new king wasted no time. Every honorary title Andrew still clung to was gone. His royal duties, gone. His privileges, gone. Even his security was reduced, forcing him to plead for protection like any other civilian. The man who once lived above accountability was now exiled in plain sight. A prince without a purpose, a royal without redemption. It was the image that said everything. No need for words, no need for explanation. As King Charles walked the golden aisle of his coronation, one man stood apart.
Prince Andrew, once the Queen's favored son, now the monarchy's most radioactive name. To Andrew, it was humiliation beyond words. To Charles, it was surgery, painful but necessary, to cut away an infection before it consumed the crown. The cameras captured every second of his fall from grace. No uniform, no medals, no ceremonial robes, just a plain black suit, the costume of a man stripped of his place. His siblings strode with purpose, radiant in royal splendor. Andrew shuffled behind, his face tight, his smile brittle. Every glance told the same story. He was there, but no longer of them. Charles barely nodded in his direction. William avoided his eyes entirely. Even Harry, himself an outcast, seemed more welcome than the disgraced Duke. It didn't end there. At the Easter service later that year, the pattern repeated like a cruel ritual. Charles and William walked ahead, laughing with the crowd. Andrew lingered in the background, ignored even by his nieces and nephews. Once a prince, now a ghost haunting the family that wished he'd disappear. But public exile didn't stop the whispers from the palace walls. Behind the curtains, staff began to speak, each story peeling away another layer of royal illusion. One said he'd leave heaps of dirty laundry scattered everywhere, expecting servants to clean it without a word. Another described his obsession with baths drawn to an exact temperature, measured, not guessed, and his fury if it wasn't perfect. A valet recalled being ordered to iron his shoelaces flat before every wear. Absurd, yes, but revealing. Each bizarre detail painted the same picture. A man so drenched in entitlement that normal life, normal decency, had long since evaporated.